And it's great to be with everyone today. SFC is such a great program, and it's so important that we are all participating in this conversation and that we are all trying to be a part of the solution to reduce polarization, raise the level of decorum as we constantly are talking about the, balancing people, planet, and prosperity. All three are very important, and without, any one of those items, it's really hard to balance out the other two. So today I'm just going to do a quick overview of why Canada Action believes the world needs more Canadian resources, more Canada in general, more Canadian energy, more Canadian ingenuity, more Canadian innovation, more Canadian collaboration, more Canadian expertise and experience in tackling some of these environmental challenges, specifically with climate, specifically with the environment. Very, very important topics. We're all concerned about protecting the environment. We're all concerned about taking climate action. And I think Canada's got an amazing record. And I think when more people learn about our record, they have this sort of aha moment, sort of the light bulb clicks on. And, it's something we can really be proud of. It's also something where we don't ever just rest on our laurels and just say, oh, it's enough, we've done enough. No, that's another reason why we should be supporting what's happening in Canada to meet global demand for the resources that we can supply, because we are never satisfied that we've achieved enough. We're always trying to get better. And it's really, something, again, that reinforces the point that we should be proud of our people who make up our resource industries, who make up our country, all Canadians. We should be proud of our record, which I'll talk about today. And through that, we should really be proud of our natural resources. Our country is built on natural resources. Natural resources include people, they include animals, it includes our beautiful parks, our beautiful vistas, our beautiful cities and provinces, and it includes, of course, the actual physical commodities that we build things out of. So today, energy and climate, the key word is and. It's not energy versus the climate. That's a ridiculous statement because everything requires energy and we need to figure out a balanced path going forward. So when we look at where we're at today and we look at where we've been at in the future, fossil fuels and renewables, people try to make this at times it's like this either or. The reality is we're still going to need fossil fuels for a very long time. And if we look back at percentage share of primary energy in 1970, 2017, even forecasts to 2040, lately with the new IEA's net zero 2050 roadmap, there's obviously been some revised forecasts and projections for how we could increase renewables on the right and lower fossil fuels on the left. But even if we lower that down to say 50%, we have to also remember that total energy demand increases dramatically between now and 2040, 2050. By 2050, it's expected that global energy demand is going to double as more people buy iPhones and laptops and air conditioners and fridges. And when we electrify the entire vehicle fleet, which will take quite a while, but when we do that, we're going to need a lot more electricity demand, a lot more energy demand for that. When more people fly and go on trips, go on holidays, put their children in extracurricular activities, and so on and so forth. And so we're going to need a lot more energy. So I put this slide up just to kind of, again, provide the context that we can and we must do both. We should have an all-inclusive policy towards absolutely supporting innovation in our clean technology, our renewables space, but we also should continue to support our oil and gas space as well. Those oil and gas companies are among the largest investors in a lot of these other things we're talking about today, and they're absolutely committed to net zero. They're committed to reducing their footprint. They're committed to working with Indigenous communities. And as long as the world is using something that Canadians produce, it could be hockey sticks, it could be couches, it could be iPhones, it could be oil and gas, it could be maple syrup, whatever it is. If the world needs it and we can make it, as Canadians, we should be proudly promoting our capacity and our ability to meet that global demand for the benefit of local families, communities, provinces, and our national economy. So today, Canada, we talk about energy, and it's been said in the past that Canada could be an energy superpower. I would argue strongly, we're already an energy superpower. Hydroelectricity, natural gas, oil, electricity in general, electricity exports. We're number 2 exporter of electricity in the world. Of course, that's the United States. Nuclear power above average and six total. Renewable energy, 7th in the world. Liquid biofuels, 8th, and wind power, 9th. We were a top 10 in solar. Last couple of years, we slipped into kind of the low teens. Still, low teens for solar is a great ranking for a country that is so large with such a low population density and with incredibly cold winters and a shorter season for sunlight versus lower latitude locations. So a great context, a great framing for us just to remember, how Canada fits in the world. And when we look at Canada's record, again, I'm going to talk a lot about Canada's record today. But when we do look at our record, we are tops in the OECD, tops in the G20, right up there with Norway and just a couple other countries for low and non-emitting power generation. So again, 67% of our electricity comes from non-emitting sources. And when you add in, from renewables, when you add in nuclear, we're about 80%. 4/5 of all of our electricity comes from power that does not produce emissions in its generation. So again, a very interesting statistic. And I would argue for all of the people and groups that are out there very passionate about these topics, I think sometimes it concerns me. We don't see more talked about this. We don't see more about our record of wind, our record of solar, our record of clean tech, our record of environmental protection from the people and from the groups that are seeking and that are always talking about shutting things down. We got to get away from that polarization. It doesn't do anyone any favors to say that we should do better, better, better. Well, you need to know where you're at today. You need to have a starting point so that you can measure that. And when we measure Canada's current place in the world, we're doing remarkably well, and we will always continue to strive to get better. Now let's go and flip over to oil. So recently it's been interesting. We saw the IEA was out with their net zero. A couple months ago, the IEA was saying that we weren't going to hit 2019 oil demand until 2023. That was 100 million barrels a day. Just last week, the IEA actually said, wait a second, no, we're going to actually hit it Q4 or Q1. 2 years within a 2-year difference, because oil demand in a lot of countries that are already kind of bouncing back from the pandemic has already broken through the 2019 records. And so we have to have a conversation about where should this energy come from? How can Canadians benefit? And absolutely that it's the smart thing to do to maximize the value of our resources that we sell as Canadians. We own the resources in the vast majority of the time. For example, oil and gas. Canadians own it. Governments manage it and lease it to companies who develop it, who employ people, who pay taxes, who pay royalties, who create jobs, who fund community initiatives like schools, hospitals, STARS Air Ambulance, the United Way, Salvation Army, the Red Cross, you name it. And all Canadians benefit. And this is all to the world's highest environmental standards. So 108.2 million barrels a day is the forecast now by 2030. It's substantially higher than pre-pandemic levels. And Canada should be a supplier of choice. We firmly believe, based on, again, our record. What we also need to be talking about is this IEA net zero and going out to 2040. So we talked about 2030. Let's go to 2040. 2040, the world's actually going to need 38 million barrels of new production by 2040 to meet global demand. Even if global demand peaks, it does not go to zero the next day. And what we often don't hear about is the geologic fact, it's physics, that when you produce oil out of the ground, as you take the oil out, the pressure in the ground drops, and eventually that well will stop producing. So every year, using 2019 levels of 100 million barrels per day, you need about 4 to 5 million barrels of new production in 2019 just to replace the decline in production of existing wells. And so you need this estimate from McKinsey, 38 million barrels by 2040 to meet demand, to replace declines, to avert an energy crisis. There was the Colonial Pipeline incident in the US a month ago, and people were literally filling plastic bags with gasoline, putting them in their trunks. I saw one gentleman had put a tarp in the back of his truck, and he filled it with gasoline, and it was sloshing all over the place. It's not a very safe way to store gasoline, but energy is not just gasoline. It's of course petrochemicals. It's of course thousands of products all around us. It's the adhesives in plywood. It's it's one part of the structure of vaccines. It's so many different uses and different things. And we currently do not have the technology to just get off oil tomorrow, which a lot of anti-Canadian energy exports and anti-Canadian pipeline groups are always talking about. But what they fail to talk about is the reality of substitution. And when we talk about substitution, who is going to be the supplier for 38 million barrels if Canada doesn't want to participate? If we don't want to sell the resources that we have that are produced to the highest environmental standards with a constant progress of climate leadership and working with Indigenous communities and protecting and promoting and championing human rights, worker safety, labor, and equality, transparency, well, then who should? Who will? And so 38 million barrels, that's the reality of substitution. If it doesn't come from Canada, it does, and it will come from somewhere else. And Canada needs to step up to the plate. I think we can do a lot more for the environment by actually asking consumers to choose. Where do you want to get your energy from? Do you want to get it from Canada with our record? And if we do that, I think we actually can make other suppliers compete with us, not necessarily on price, although we can compete on price, but not just on price, but on the climate, environment, social, and governance standards that we win and we lead in. That 38 million barrels equates to $500 billion per year of investment required. So go out 10 years, go out 20 years, go out 30 years to 2050, tens of trillions of dollars of investment. And I think the investment should come from Canada. I think the investment should choose investors, policymakers, and consumers should choose Canada, just like we're thinking about fair trade coffee beans. We're thinking about responsible chocolate. We're thinking about responsible cotton. We're thinking about supply chains around the world and where things are made and how people are treated. Then we're also thinking about the environment. I think people should choose Canada. And I think as Canadians, we should all rally behind that sort of made in Canada by Canadian, Team Canada message, which is so incredibly important to just, again, get rid of the polarization and talk about these facts, these realities, and how we can all prosper, how we can take some of this prosperity and continue to invest it in reducing emissions and in renewables and in tidal and geothermal and helium and all these other things that we need and we use and that Canadians excel at. I think that that's a real opportunity for us. Pipelines have been in the news. Keystone XL today was officially canceled, final, done. I actually, one of the main reasons I started Canada Action was Keystone XL. I remember Lush Cosmetics talking about shutting down the tar sands, the world's most destructive project. And when I asked Lush why they were only doing that in Canada, they didn't have an answer. And when I looked at the facts, I realized that 0.003% or some crazy number of the Canadian boreal forest had been disturbed by oil sands mining, and all that land must be reclaimed. And yeah, it doesn't look pretty, but the reality is biodiversity in northern Alberta is something like 85-90%. Biodiversity in southern Alberta is like 50% or 40%. And everything that humans do, again, has an impact. So we need to have these balanced conversations. When we talk about pipelines, we've seen all Canadian pipelines opposed. Line 9 was opposed, and that allowed more Canadian oil to enter Quebec. That's a win for the environment. That's a win for Canada. And if we could actually get more Canadian oil to, again, the other 50% that Quebec's not using locally, Ontario and the Atlantic provinces, we could reduce emissions and save money. So it's interesting that there continues to be this campaign, this massive campaign against Canadian pipelines. It doesn't matter if Indigenous communities want to buy these pipelines. It doesn't matter if all 20 elected communities on the Coastal GasLink route support that project. These groups don't always seem to care. They don't seem to want to have a balanced conversation. And certainly there's a variety of opinions. We need to respect all opinions, but at some point we got to look at what does the majority want and what's happening. And again, talking about substitution. So with Keystone XL, we know that blocking Keystone XL, canceling Keystone XL, it hasn't kept a single barrel of oil in the ground. 2010 oil demand was 90 million barrels. 2021 oil demand is going to be 100 million barrels. surpassing the pre-pandemic peak. So it hasn't kept oil in the ground, and it hasn't shut down Canadian oil production because our production has grown, and it hasn't reduced emissions. I mean, blocking that pipeline, blocking Canadian pipelines doesn't actually do any of those things. What it does is it helps other suppliers with weaker climate, environment, social, and governance standards. And that's not a win for the environment or for any of those values that we all would talk about how important they are to us. So we got to remember, pipelines are the safest method of transporting the oil and gas we all use. Anyone who's ever been on an airplane, pipelines made that possible. Our food production, pipelines make it possible. Our home heating, pipelines make it possible. And Line 5 right now, I mean, that's in the news. That's been operating safely, built by the same company who built the Hoover Dam in the 1950s, operating safely for 65 years, something like that, and never had an incident. And 55% of Michigan's home heating and 50% of Quebec and Ontario's gasoline, and the main way that Pearson Airport gets its jet fuel. And we shut down that pipeline. I think it's 2,000 tanker trucks a day equivalent to replace those volumes. So there's always this idea of substitution. And on Line 5, I mean, that pipeline company is trying to build a tunnel to better protect the environment. Those other sides of the story need to also happen, need to be told. So what has the pipeline fiasco, these pipeline issues in Canada, what has been the result? It hasn't reduced emissions. It hasn't lowered oil demand. It hasn't lowered oil production. What it has done is it's impacted Canada's economy in a huge way. So I'll give you a couple statistics. In 2018, insufficient pipeline capacity cost Canada $2.35 million per hour. Per hour. You think about how many nurses, how many teachers, how many buses, how many daycares, how many opportunities for scholarships and for improving schools and for looking after Canadians across the country that could have helped. And it's remarkable. It has been a remarkable loss of opportunity to Canada. When we look at just right in the pandemic, this is what happens when you don't have pipelines. You have too much production. You don't have enough capacity to transport that production. And so Mexico has a very similar grade of oil to Western Canadian Select, our main oil sands blend. They were getting $20 more per barrel, March 10th, 2020, as one snapshot. And yeah, our oil should sell for a little bit less because we have to send a pipeline from Canada to the US Gulf Coast. Mexico fills a tanker and the tanker's cheaper and it's a shorter trip. The US Gulf Coast is, of course, currently the world's largest concentration of heavy oil refining. China is building a lot of big refineries too, though. And if we have enough pipelines and if we can also diversify our customers to sell to the whole world, Mexico, for example, they can sell to anyone. The US is now exporting oil all over the world. They can sell to anyone. All of these other top oil producers can sell to anyone, but Canada is forced, because of a lack of infrastructure, to sell 99% of our oil to one person, one customer, and that's the United States. That doesn't benefit Canada. This has been part of the reason why we've had these massive discounts, as you can see here. And this has had a huge cost to Canada's economy. So when we add up all these different impacts, asset sales, I'll give you one example of an asset sale. Statoil, now called Equinor, Norway's national oil company. They were pestered and protested by Greenpeace in Norway to sell their Alberta oil sands project. So they did. They sold it. They did not sell any of the other 29 countries where they operated in, many of those countries, of course, without carbon pricing initiatives like Alberta, without all these different metrics of climate leadership. That didn't matter to Greenpeace, though. And recently, we saw a big announcement from Equinor that they're actually investing $10 billion in Brazilian heavy oil. So there's one example. Leaving Canada, but not keeping oil on the ground, not actually a win for the environment. It's a win for other countries. Then you add in pipeline investment from Canadian companies investing elsewhere, projects here getting canceled. TC bought a big US company, Enbridge bought a big US company. The heavy oil discount to the US, foreign oil imports to Canada is far more than 120 billion now. Another big opportunity lost, though. And then canceled or stalled energy projects. And you add all this up, you get close to a $500 trillion. Remarkable, remarkable, remarkable amount of lost opportunity. Now that's looking back, and I think moving forward, we've got a lot of great news because we've got Trans Mountain under construction. That's going to help us compete. So here, we also have LNG Canada under construction. So let's look, 2019, South Korea was getting double their supply from the US. The US exporting oil all over the world. LNG imports to China in 2019, up 13% year over year. Demand for LNG and natural gas is growing immensely. Norway's oil output up 43% from 2019 to 2024. They're exploring in the Arctic. They're drilling new wells. They're operating all over the world. They're selling some more assets, but they're also investing in Brazil. And another metric that we can, again, sort of boil this down to the simplest way that we can all understand this is, in the time that this presentation will take, Canada will import a couple $1 million of foreign oil. And if we had a pipeline, we could help reduce that. We could also increase the amount of oil we use and refine ourselves in Ontario, Quebec, and New Brunswick. Lots and lots and lots of opportunities. And looking at the macro, what's happening around the world, it's so critically important. Another point I would make is we've seen Northern Gateway pipeline shut down, huge protests against that. And we've seen huge protests against Trans Mountain. What we don't hear about, again, substitution. 500,000 barrels a day of Alaskan oil, similar to Canada's oil sands blends, sailing in the same waterways every day, unopposed, no protesters. And Canada has better marine safety standards. So this, again, is another important part of the conversation. We can protect the environment. We can support Canadian energy. We can have a balanced conversation. We can reduce polarization. And it's, these are some of the sort of facts that we need to talk about. Back to Norway. Norway was out talking about, oil demand in the future. And even if oil demand for vehicles declines with an increase in electric vehicle sales, now you got to remember, you got a couple billion cars on the road, and currently, there's 10 or 20 million electric vehicles being sold per year. It's going to take a long time to replace that total fleet. And when that does happen, and it will happen, we're still going to be using a lot of oil for petrochemicals. You actually can't make an electric vehicle without oil because most of the car is advanced plastics and composites. And you need to reduce the weight of the car even further to account for the heavier weight of the battery. So to increase efficiency and, of course, make it safe. So there's lots of other interesting aspects to the conversation about oil and gas. And, in Norway, they're very proud of their industry. I think in Canada, we should be very proud of ours as well. Norway and Canada would be two of the world's most responsible oil producers. And talking about phasing out oil and gas. And, this is what the Norwegian Minister of Energy had to say, because they have a similar model in terms of their social programs, their social spending. Now, we have also compare apples to apples. Norway's 5.5 million people. Canada's 37 million. A lot of Canada's oil and gas production's in Alberta. We've sent a lot of transfers and continue to support other provinces with the wealth that every province creates. We all support each other. And that's a great part of being in a country like Canada. And but we do need to have this conversation. We do need to talk about what it means to our economy. Our oil and gas industry in Canada has created about, again, $500 billion for government since the year 2000. And that has paid for social programs, schools, roads, and everything else that we all see around us. So talking about Canada's record, top 10 oil exporters, Canada's number one. We talk about ESG and climate. We all would value a green future. We would all value environmental performance, sustainable development, good resource governance, democracy, human freedom, transparency and not having corruption, the rule of law, global peace, women, peace, and security. We would all value these things. We would all value these metrics of CESG, I like to call it, and Canada's number one of the world's top 10 oil exporters. This is why the world needs more Canadian energy. This is why we should be the last producer out of the pool. And this is why we should be champions of our record. And yeah, we can all care about the environment. We do care about the environment, but we should be sourcing supply from countries like Canada who are always trying to get better and who have this amazing starting point. So let's talk about Canada's oil and gas record, specifically with climate. Currently, Canada is 40% of global oil production subject to carbon pricing. 40. This is a remarkable statistic that we do not hear about enough. We do not know about. People don't talk about. People need to talk about and discuss more. Alberta, additionally, was the first top supplier of oil to the US with carbon pricing initiatives back since 2007. And, it's a record we can really be proud of. I think that certainly there will be more carbon pricing programs around the world, but Canada is currently a leader, and we have such a great record that we should all be talking about. We talk about oil sands emissions intensities. Yesterday there was a great announcement from 5 of the largest oil sands companies to get all working together to get to net zero for 2050. And then there's a Bloomberg story talking about Canada's dirty oil. And that headline, it sounds good, but when you actually look at the facts, it's not actually reality. And it's unfortunate that there's so much misrepresentation. So looking at the most recent study, 2018 data showed that oil sands emissions intensities were up to 35% lower than previously reported in 2015. A lot of this data is old, it's out of date, it doesn't take into account the amazing technological innovation and collaboration that's happening. And another study out of California in 2014 said that there were 6 other countries producing oil with higher emissions than Canada. And there have not been the same level of attention on those other countries. So the point being, shutting down Canada to support oil production from potentially 6 other jurisdictions with higher emissions, it doesn't actually reduce emissions, it actually increases emissions. And these are, again, parts of the conversation we need to be having. Canada's oil and gas sector, the largest spender on environmental protection of any business in the country. Again, just something we should be proud of and something that we should continue to improve, continue to work at, continue to reduce our footprint, collaborate, and work together. 75% of our clean technology spending, again, also Canadian oil and gas companies. Another great statistic that I think all Canadians should be proud of. We're not just accepting the status quo. We need to get our story out there, but we're always trying to get better. And that oil sands net zero pathway was a great example. COSIA is the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, the biggest example in the world of competing companies sharing intellectual property and patents and technologies to work together to reduce environmental issues and to lower the footprint and work on these issues. Again, another amazing thing that as Canadians we should be proud of. And this is already building upon a record of reducing emissions. So the oil sands emissions intensity is down 36%. You got a company like Whitecap. It's one of the only oil and gas producer in the world that's net negative for emissions. Absolutely amazing. There are oil sands producers that are producing oil with emissions well below the global average. It's been said that the world's highest emission barrels come from Nigeria. It's been said that the highest emission barrels in North America come from California. And what we also don't hear about enough is Canada's record on flaring and methane reductions. We are actually the largest producer with the lowest flaring and the lowest methane release. And we're continuing to work to get even better. So people, countries, consumers, producers, policymakers, elected officials, they should all come here and they should tour. We've actually done tours before, but they should come here and look at what we're doing, but also observe the attitude. We're not arrogant about it. We're not content with what we've done. We're not bragging. We actually need to brag more, to be honest, because our record kicks butt. But come here and look at what we're doing, and let's all work together to continue to protect the climate, protect the environment. At the same time, though, continue to allow people to have access to, there are people that have to choose between home heating and food in the winter in places, energy poverty. There's people who, have to choose between, filling up when gas gets too expensive or other things. We want to maintain a reasonable supply, affordable, reliable supply of energy until the technology exists to replace, all of these uses. And right now, that's many years, decades out. Clean technology, again, just sort of summarizing, second in the world in the Clean Tech Innovation Index, 11 out of 100 companies on the list. we should be shouting this from the rooftops, to be honest. And last part, and this is with flaring and methane. So take Canadian standards and apply it worldwide, and we would actually take the equivalent to 100 million cars off the road from how Canadian oil and gas producers produce Canadian oil and gas. Canada should be global energy supplier of choice. The world 1000% needs more Canadian energy. We can reduce emissions. We can protect the environment. We can support Canadian families. We can invest for the future by supporting our local homegrown Canadian energy. Talking about building bridges and taking people on tours, here's a photo of Lynn Exner Nellis, and Lisa Helps, the mayor of Victoria, BC. And I was there as well, and we took the mayor of BC up on a tour of the oil sands. This was at Foster Creek. This was the first operating oil sands project for in situ development, which is Latin for in place, where they drill. And you'll see this flat gravel area. In 8 to 10 years, this area will be retreed. And in 20, 25, 30 years, it'll look like the forest around it. You won't even know what was ever there. And we had such a great day with Lisa. Lisa said, among many other things, she said that everything she had heard about Canadian oil and gas was from social media, and what we had done that day dispelled a lot of those myths. And she actually said, as long as the world needs oil and gas, we should be looking to Canada. So it's really just reinforces this idea of reducing polarization, raising the level of decorum, raising people's understanding, and trying to make sure that our opinions are based on a firm footing of facts. And we can certainly agree to disagree at times, but we all do need to also recognize everything we're wearing, everything we're going to eat, everything we drink, everything we do, our homes, our possessions, our holidays, our memories, everything is made possible by natural resources. And often there are so many ways that we don't even comprehend of how complicated the supply chain is to make these things possible that we just all take for granted. And so, the world needs more Canadian resources, and we need more conversations like this one with Lisa Helps, building bridges, collaborating, and working together. This is, I think, my second last slide, and just really reinforcing, I think, the power of having these positive conversations. For me, I've worn a shirt or a hat or whatever, thousands of times now, all these years. And the thumbs up and the people who want to talk, the positivity is always so great. And yeah, at times there's people who think the shirt's a joke, and you might be able to get into a positive conversation with them. But, you just really realize when you wear the shirt or when you see people out kind of representing this positive brand that we're not alone. The majority of Canadians polled in recent pollings for Alberta Business Council, for Montreal Economic Institute, by Ipsos, it's like 72% of Canadians want to support local resource production, local oil and gas production, with a continued focus on environmental protection. And the two go hand in hand. That's how it's done in Canada. You don't have one without the other. So I just really commend everyone who's on the call today. I really just commend the entire SFC team. You guys are just doing such amazing stuff, and it's on us to be a part of the solution. And so thank you very much for having me today. I included this little slide. This is my last slide, but I included this just because this was a billboard we took out in Ottawa when Canada was producing the world's most responsible oil, but selling it for the lowest price, and all of the environmental anti-pipeline groups were celebrating. Really, the only people who benefited again were the other oil suppliers, and Canadians were really losing out. And we were forfeiting $3.3 million per hour to the USA at that time, who was buying our oil at a steep discount. We got to get away from the polarization and the emotional headline focused sound bites. We all win when we work together. Canada's a climate leader. We can do better. We're not perfect, but we're really doing so much right now. And we got a record we should be proud of. We should be proud of our people, and we should also be proud of our resources. Thank you very much.